Ever wonder what happens when animation goes too far for television? Some anime didn't just push the limits, they smashed them. From redrawn scenes to full blackout screens, these moments were so intense that networks panicked and grabbed the scissors. But here's the thing sometimes, what got cut said more about the culture than the show itself. Get ready, because we're diving into the 15 anime moments that TV just couldn't handle. Even in ink and pixels. Number 15, Dragon Ball Z, 1989. Before it was a global pop culture titan, Dragon Ball Z gave broadcasters cold sweats. When it first aired outside Japan, networks faced a problem: they loved the fights, but hated the realism of injury and pain. Every punch landed too hard, every explosion too final. So, scenes were trimmed, sound effects softened, and dialogue rewritten into moral lessons. Remember when Vegeta finished off his enemy? In Japan, it was brutal honesty. In the US, it became sending him away. 4Kids and Funimation fought to make it kid-safe, even redrawing blood into dust and changing dialogue about life and loss. Viewers ended up with a friendlier, sanitized version that left out the emotional cost of battle. The irony? Dragon Ball Z's legacy of courage and perseverance came through despite those edits. Fans eventually hunted down uncut VHS and DVDs just to see the raw energy they'd been missing. That underground obsession only made the legend bigger. In trying to tame it, networks turned Dragon Ball Z into a symbol of resistance against censorship itself. Number 14, Yu Yu Hakusho, 1992. When Yu Yu Hakusho hit Western airwaves, executives had no idea what they'd signed up for. A teenage rebel who literally walks between life and death, fistfights that look too real, and emotional stakes that hit harder than expected, this was no Saturday morning cartoon. The show's early episodes showed the messy consequences of human choices, something networks weren't ready for. So they toned it down. Spirit blasts were brightened, hits were cut away from, and some moments were redubbed to sound like friendly sparring instead of real danger. Even Yusuke's rougher personality got softened, turning a street kid with heart into a polite, positive role model. But fans could feel it. The uncut Japanese version had grit, rhythm, and pain that made every victory earned. By filtering it through a safety lens, broadcasters missed the point. Yu Yu Hakusho wasn't about violence. It was about redemption through struggle. The edits didn't ruin it, but they did strip away the raw heartbeat that made it unforgettable. Ironically, the very spirit energy networks tried to hide is what kept the show alive decades later. Number 13, Sailor Moon, 1992. At first glance, Sailor Moon doesn't look like something you'd call too violent. But back in the early 90s, this magical girl phenomenon terrified Western censors. Why? Because when villains attacked, the consequences were dark. Entire cities drained of life, people turning to dust metaphors for danger wrapped in sparkles. American networks redubbed, redrew, and outright removed whole sequences. Characters' bonds were rewritten, and energy battles became light shows. Even deaths were rebranded as teleportations. The tragic ending of the first season, which had Japanese kids in tears, was rewritten into a cheerful power nap. The edits weren't malicious, they were just cautious. Western broadcasters thought kids couldn't handle stakes in their cartoons. Yet those very stakes are what made Sailor Moon powerful. It showed that beauty, courage, and pain could coexist. Fans later discovered the Japanese version and were stunned by how mature it really was. The censored one gave us nostalgia, but the original gave us art. It's proof that even the prettiest moonlight can cast a shadow networks tried to erase. Number 12, One Piece, 1999. When One Piece sailed to American shores, 4Kids Entertainment thought they were getting a swashbuckling adventure for kids. What they got was chaos, tragedy, and heartbreak wrapped in a pirate flag. So they did what networks often do, they scrubbed it clean. Guns became poppers. Blood became sweat. A heartbreaking goodbye turned into a see you later. Even Sanji's cigarette became a lollipop. But One Piece was never about cartoon fun. It was about found family, loss, and the cost of dreams. By trying to make it safe, networks ripped the soul out of it. Entire scenes of sacrifice and sorrow were sliced away, and arcs that shaped the characters were truncated beyond recognition. Years later, Funimation re-released the series uncut, and fans saw what they'd been missing: the raw emotion, the humor, and the pain that made the crew's bond feel real. It's almost poetic, a story about freedom censored by the very system it defied. The cuts couldn't sink One Piece, but they did remind the world that not all treasure glitters. Number 11. Gantz, 2004. If Dragon Ball Z gave censors a headache, Gantz gave them nightmares. Broadcast networks in Japan tried to air it, but even there, it pushed limits. The show threw viewers into a bizarre game of survival where ordinary people faced consequences for every decision. And those consequences weren't pretty. TV versions blurred, shadowed, and blacked out entire scenes. What viewers saw on late-night broadcasts were flashes of light and quick cuts, like fragments of a dream. Only when the DVDs came out did fans realize how much had been hidden. The show's real point wasn't chaos, but how humans react when their morals are tested under pressure. Still, networks couldn't risk it. Sponsors balked, schedules changed, and Gantz was quietly shuffled to niche time slots. Ironically, those edits helped its cult reputation grow. The forbidden nature of the full version made it an underground legend among anime fans. Censors tried to contain it, but in doing so, they amplified its myth. Gantz proved that sometimes what's hidden speaks louder than what's shown. Number 10. Tokyo Ghoul, 2014. When Tokyo Ghoul first aired, it wasn't just another dark fantasy, it was a visual gut punch. Every frame was soaked in tension, every fight a glimpse into the pain of being different in a world built to fear you. But television couldn't handle it. Broadcasters dimmed the entire screen, turned blood black, and cropped out entire shots. What aired looked like someone had dropped a fog machine over the animation. It wasn't just about hiding gore. The edits stripped the story of its moral weight. Kaneki's transformation wasn't about aggression, it was about identity and control. Yet the constant censorship blurred that emotional truth, turning moments of revelation into confusing silhouettes. Fans watching the censored version didn't realize how much was missing until the uncut Blu-rays dropped, revealing what the creators actually meant to show: humanity at war with itself. Ironically, the heavy censorship only boosted Tokyo Ghoul's legend. The blacked-out frames became memes, the missing scenes became mystery. Viewers hunted down every uncut clip they could find, turning curiosity into obsession. What started as a visual compromise became an underground marketing triumph. In trying to make Tokyo Ghoul safer, networks made it unforgettable. Number 9. Elfen Lied, 2004. Few anime tested the limits of what television could show quite like Elfen Lied. Behind its soft pink opening theme hid a storm of tragedy and pain. When it aired on Japanese TV, the networks were forced to blur, crop, and silence dozens of moments. Even then, they admitted the show was barely broadcastable. But Elfen Lied wasn't about showing chaos, it was about what makes people human. Lucy, torn between compassion and rage, was a symbol of broken innocence. The violence was meant to make viewers question how cruelty is born, not to glorify it. Yet when the edits hit, that message got buried. TV audiences saw flickers of horror without the emotional context that explained it. The uncut version, later released on DVD, became infamous. Fans hailed it as one of the boldest anime ever made, while critics called it unwatchable. But one thing's certain, it forced the industry to rethink what too much really means. When something that raw and emotional can't air as intended, it exposes not the flaws of the show, but the limits of the medium itself. Number 8. Tenjo Tenge, 2004. Tenjo Tenge entered the early 2000s like a thunderclap. It was part martial arts, part high school drama, part chaos, and completely too much for network TV. The story was about rival clans locked in an endless struggle, and the fights were brutal, beautifully animated, and emotionally charged. Too charged, in fact, for broadcasters. When it aired outside Japan, entire episodes were trimmed. Dialogue was rewritten, fights shortened, and the tone flipped from tragedy to mild rivalry. The edits didn't just tone it down, they transformed it into a different series. The U.S. release was marketed as high school action, when in reality, the original was a study of pride, vengeance, and legacy. Still, Tenjo Tenge developed a cult following because people could sense the missing intensity. Fans traded import DVDs to see the full story. And when they did, they realized the irony. The very edits meant to make it palatable actually made people hungrier for authenticity. It wasn't about shock value, it was about raw storytelling. And when you slice away that rawness, you lose the very thing that made it real. Number 7. Violence Jack, 1986. Before anime was mainstream, Violence Jack roamed the underground so extreme that TV networks wouldn't touch it without heavy editing. Based on Go Nagai's post-apocalyptic manga, it depicted a world gone feral, where survival meant sacrifice and morality didn't always win. When Japanese broadcasters finally agreed to air parts of it, they chopped it down so drastically that the story became nearly incoherent. Viewers who caught those TV cuts didn't see the original intent, a raw allegory for chaos and rebirth. It wasn't about destruction, it was about the thin thread holding humanity together when everything else collapses. But the edits stripped out the layers, leaving behind confusion instead of commentary. Years later, the uncut releases circulated quietly, gaining a reputation as one of the most controversial anime ever made. The censored broadcast became a footnote, but the legend of what was too much to show turned Violence Jack into something bigger, a warning, a statement, and a symbol of how far creators will go to make viewers feel something real. Number 6. Sonic X, 2003. You wouldn't expect Sonic X, a show about a blue hedgehog, to be part of this list. But when it came to Western TV, even Sonic wasn't safe from the scissors. The original Japanese version had surprising emotional stakes, moments of fear, tension, and loss that made it more than just a cartoon about speed. 4Kids Entertainment, the same company behind the One Piece edits, stepped in to make it family-friendly. They trimmed down every serious moment-softened tone, removed references to peril, and reworded entire scenes. Characters' personalities shifted. Dr. Eggman's darker humor became comic relief, and the emotional beats that made kids reflect got swapped for harmless chatter. The result? A fun show that lacked its emotional backbone. Fans who later saw the uncut version were stunned. It wasn't just brighter or louder. It had depth. Sonic's world was once a mirror for courage and responsibility, not just racing and jokes. Sonic X became a case study in how over-editing can turn heart into fluff. Networks may have thought they were protecting kids, but they really just slowed Sonic down. Number 5. Inuyasha, 2000. When Inuyasha arrived on Western television, it had all the makings of a hit romance, myth, adventure, and a sharp edge of danger. But that edge was exactly what the networks dulled. In Japan, Inuyasha thrived on emotional weight and tension. Each fight had consequences. Each injury left a mark. Yet when it crossed the ocean, broadcasters scrubbed away anything that hinted at too much realism. Scenes of real struggle became short flashes of light. Characters' expressions were softened, and moments of loss were turned into quick recoveries. Even the tone of dialogue shifted. What was once poetic sorrow became cheerful determination. The U.S. version of Inuyasha was still beautiful, but it lost the haunting rhythm that made it legendary in Japan. Still, the edits couldn't erase its spirit. Fans grew up loving both versions, but the uncut one became a rite of passage, a deeper, more emotional experience that revealed how much heart the networks had hidden. In trying to make it safer, they'd unknowingly made it more mysterious. When you take the bite out of Inuyasha, you don't make it sweeter, you just make it quieter. And silence never suited a story this fierce. Number 4. Mobile Suit Gundam Wing, 1995. Gundam Wing didn't just bring giant robots to primetime TV, it brought politics, grief, and moral conflict. But when Cartoon Network aired it in the early 2000s, executives faced a challenge. How do you market a war story to teenagers without showing the cost of war? Their answer: edit everything. Explosions stayed, but the fallout didn't. Dialogue about destruction became defeats. Emotional confrontations were rephrased to sound like disagreements rather than loss. And those beautifully painful moments of silence, where characters reflected on their choices, were often cut to make space for ad breaks. The edits didn't destroy Gundam Wing, but they stripped it of its philosophy. The show wasn't about mechs, it was about what happens when ideals meet reality. The uncut Japanese version was almost poetic in its sorrow, while the English TV version felt like an action reel. Still, that action reel was enough to hook a generation. When those same fans found the original later, they realized how deep it really ran. Gundam Wing survived its edits not because it was flashy, but because its soul was indestructible. Number 3. Mobile Suit Gundam, the 08th MS Team, 1996. Unlike its flashier cousins, the 08th MS Team told war stories from the dirt level. No hero pilots, no glory, just soldiers doing what they had to. That realism made it powerful, and made censors uneasy. On television, scenes of wreckage and despair were shortened, while dialogue about the human toll of battle was redubbed into simpler, softer language. Even the music cues were changed in certain regions. What was meant to sound mournful became triumphant. The end result was a sanitized version of a show that was never about winning, it was about surviving. Fans noticed the cuts didn't make it less compelling, but they did make it less honest. The 08th MS Team was meant to blur the line between right and wrong, yet television insisted on keeping things black and white. It was a rare case where the edits made the story shallower without anyone realizing it. Years later, the uncut version became a fan favorite among purists. It's remembered not just as a Gundam story, but as a rare look at humanity beneath the armor a Truth Networks once thought audiences couldn't handle. Number 2. Pokémon, 1997. Yes, Pokémon. It may sound tame compared to the others, but few shows were cut and trimmed as heavily. When the series reached Western screens, broadcasters removed whole episodes, redrew scenes, and softened moments they thought might be too intense. Remember the Tower of Terror arc or the early Team Rocket episodes? In Japan, they had surprising emotional depth. Characters showed fear, sadness, and sometimes real consequences. But in the U.S., many of those scenes were edited into quick gags or skipped entirely. Even some battle moments were brightened or cropped to make them less stressful for younger viewers. The irony? Kids weren't scared, they were invested. The edits didn't just change tone, they reshaped memory. An entire generation grew up with a filtered version of Pokémon, never realizing how much darker and more mature its roots were. Still, that filtered version did one amazing thing: it introduced millions to anime. And once those fans grew up, they started seeking the originals, uncovering what had been hidden under years of bright colors and cheerful edits. Pokémon proved that sometimes even the softest cuts leave the deepest curiosity. Number 1. Bleach, 2004. When Bleach aired on Western television, it already had a reputation in Japan for being stylish, emotional, and unflinchingly raw. The series thrived on the tension between courage and fear, strength and loss. But when it hit networks like Adult Swim and later Toonami, that intensity scared the censors. They trimmed almost everything, visuals dimmed, details cropped, and dialogue softened. Entire emotional moments lost their sting. Ichigo's early fights were cleaned up, and the aftermaths, the bruises, exhaustion, and human cost were erased. What remained was exciting, sure, but it lacked the ache that made Bleach unforgettable. Yet even censored, Bleach became a cultural storm. The edits couldn't hide the rhythm, the cool, or the emotion pulsing beneath. And when fans discovered the uncut versions online and on DVD, the legend only grew. That's the strange power of censorship. It can dim the screen, but it can't dim the fire behind it. Bleach burned through every blackout, proving that when a story's spirit is strong enough, no edit can silence it. So there you have it, the moments that made networks flinch and fans obsessed. What began as too much for TV ended up shaping the legacy of anime itself, because every blackout, every blurred frame, only made audiences more curious about what was hidden. Which version do you remember watching first, the censored or the uncut? Let us know in the comments, hit that subscribe button, and stay tuned for more stories the screens once tried to hide.